Okay, hello everyone. This video is to facilitate topic 10, which is all the way at the end of this particular unit in terms of the topic areas, but certainly for preparing in your prac situation, your placement out in schools, it's probably the most vital next to the lesson planning topic that you've been doing, because along with the planning for learning, planning your learning experiences for the classes you'll be allocated for in your 2-week placement, the way in which you manage the group is just as important and really is part of that foundation of effective teaching, working with groups of young people in secondary schools. You must go into your placement starting to create a really strong foundation of classroom management, both in philosophy, so where you're located, the kind of classroom manager you hope to become, and the strategies that you're going to be able to do from day one, lesson one, that you're going to be working with those young people. So the PowerPoint, if you haven't gone through it yet, please do so, have a look through that. I'm going to be referring to particular elements of that here in this video. So it's really important that you work your way through that and have a think on the different activities, because it's really important when you're considering classroom management that you do reflect back onto the kinds of teachers that you had in your own past, or certainly if you're having some contact with schools now, the ones that you can observe, if you're a parent, even the ones that you're aware of through your children's schooling, and have a sense of, what happens with teachers when students like them and respect them? What are they doing? And then vice versa, what happens when students don't like teachers, when they misbehave for them? What is going on there in that relationship? It's really important to reflect and consider and think on those aspects. So that's what the PowerPoint prompts you to do, and introduces some of that stuff around philosophies and a beginning of strategies, although it's mostly around the philosophical stuff, the foundation, what does it mean to be an effective classroom manager? Where do you work from? What place do you work from in regards to that? And the next section, which will be forthcoming, is on that strategies stuff. So, you've got to really look at both aspects of that, starting from the philosophy point of view, where am I coming from, and then what strategies can I use straight off the bat. So if you've had a look through the PowerPoint, you'll see that one of the first slides there is a wonderful quote by John Cleese, and that really frames the rest of the PowerPoint, as it were. It's the sense that operating in these two modes, the open mode and the closed mode, and what does that represent in terms of a style of thinking and an approach to the work that you're doing with young people, and that if you operate your classroom management in a closed mode, in this tight, rigid, authoritarian, I'm the boss here, you will listen to me, you will behave, I will expect certain things from you. That may have worked in the past, certainly, and it may still work in some contexts, but in Australia. But largely, by and large, in the majority of classrooms in this country, whether it's Year 7 students in a really good metropolitan school, or regional students, or older students in tough schools, or whatever, all across the board, whatever kinds of groups of students you can think of, or in certain types of schools, the context. And this is certainly applicable to your toughest schools, although some people argue, it's a really tough school, so I have to go in super hard and super authoritarian. Look, for my money and for my experience and from my teaching this over a number of years now, and working with pre-service teachers who have gone into all sorts of different contexts, both metro and rural and regional, and tough and tough schools, and so-called easy schools where kids are well behaved. it's the, as John Cleese suggests, it's the open mode that brings the most success and long-term success with young people. Obviously, you're thinking about a 2-week placement. How do I do this in 2 weeks? But, it's again starting and building this and getting some experience and trial and error, of course. Like anything with teaching, there's a lot of trial and error, and classroom management is no exception. But this open mode where you're receptive, you're open in terms of, for me, being open is about just observing, being open and looking and taking in what's going around you. And when you go into your placement, those first 2 or 3 days where you might be doing more observation than any teaching, you might, by observation, we say it's active observation, meaning that you're actually watching and observing, and that doesn't mean just sitting there taking notes for 60 minutes. You're actually going and you're talking with young people. Observation means gathering. It's an active, it's a social process to me, observation in a classroom situation. You're going, you're talking, you're seeing what they're working with. You're inquiring about their understanding, seeing if they need help, starting to learn their names, a little bit about them perhaps, introducing yourself, allowing the students to get to know you in little small ways, those initial interactions that will frame for you when you go in and you actually teach them for 60 minutes. You'll know a few names, you can rattle those off, and you've started to build that relationship. But that open mode begins from that first minute you step into a classroom, either to observe or when you're teaching a lesson, and you're watching, you're observing, you're taking in the information that those students are communicating to you, whether it's verbally or non-verbally. You're seeing how they're interacting, the chains of interaction that shape that particular learning context. So who is talking with whom, how are they interacting, how are they thinking and doing and working, or in some cases not working, how are they detaching from the work and maybe doing other things and starting to misbehave, what triggers that, certain kinds of activities, certain students in certain combinations perhaps. All of those things, you're absorbing that in an open way, and you're being aware and receptive about what's going on, and rather than just being a tunnel vision and be like, I am the boss, I will ensure that I assert my authority here so they behave, and I expect them to behave at all times. That's, to me, that those blinkers, those closed blinkers, is not the way that you're going to find success as a teacher at the present moment in many, many contexts in this country. So that quote from John Cleese does frame it very well. Now, that frames as well the activity, and if you haven't yet, please do so. Watch those couple of videos that I present to you in that PowerPoint. They are from the wonderful comedy series Summer Heights High. If you've never watched Summer Heights High, you must watch it now as a pre-service teacher. You'll gain a lot from it if you've never seen it before. Now that you've got this lens of I wish to work in education. If you've seen it before, watch it again. You'll see it with new eyes, fresh eyes, a new perspective. It is what I feel one of the most accurate representations of modern Australian school culture that's ever been committed to film, to television show, but something that you can watch. I know there's lots of documentaries out there now, some of them about schools, and I've presented them to you. They're great too, but there's something about Summer Heights High, about the texture and the tone of that representation of a school culture that's so wonderful. Even though Chris Lilly is a 30-something-year-old man acting the part of some school children in that show, and a teacher, Mr. G, which is hilarious. But the videos that you see there are of Jonah Takalua. So Jonah is the kind of student you probably don't want to encounter, but likely will. There are lots of students out there like Jonah in some shape or form, not just male students, female students as well, who they are there to push your buttons and to make things difficult for you, and they will challenge you. And sometimes there's more than one in a class. Sometimes there's 5 in a class that make it really difficult, or more. Sometimes a whole class is like Jonah, that are constantly difficult, and always it's an uphill battle to manage them and to get them to learn. But the 2 videos that you see are 2 different teachers tackling Jonah in very different ways. And it's really important that you engage with those videos, because they show you how it can work with Jonah, with his English teacher, with his remedial reading English teacher he has there. The way in which she approaches Jonah is very different to his mainstream English teacher, which again representative of the closed and open mode. And you can see in those videos how when you approach Jonah with humor, with empathy, with understanding about his situation, there is a relationship there between that teacher, his remedial reading teacher, that she's supporting him in that, and Jonah. They have a relationship versus, well, a good relationship versus his mainstream English teacher, where she is very much operating in the closed mode. It's all about, jumping on Jonah as soon as he does anything wrong. You can see there he's baiting her all the time. He's trying to get the class to laugh at him. He says it, and it's really important when you're watching those videos, because they talk to camera and they illuminate their thinking about the situation, both Jonah and the teachers, about what's going on internally. And some of the comments that Jonah says are very insightful as to framing what's going on there. And he talks about, particularly the teacher he works well with, how she gets me, and how much he, it's that sense that she understands me, she understands who I am and what I'm about, and therefore he wants to learn for her in his own unique way. And he does some pretty nasty things to her at times, and says some pretty wild things in class, but she never goes with that in terms of feeding it. She never adds fuel to the fire. She's always deflecting and using Jonah's energy in as best as she can, productive ways. And I'm sure that teacher knows as well that it's always going to be a challenge with Jonah. So please do engage with that video, those two videos, and there are timestamps and the little notes in the PowerPoint to guide you as to what you're watching in there. But again, it represents these two different ways of managing a student, but broadly managing students, and these us versus them versus working with students kind of approach. So let me just flick to the PowerPoint. Okay, so and this, the summary there in one of the slides I presented in the PowerPoint is this idea, what does the research show? Well, educators who form these supportive relationships with students, when they've actually spoken to students about, okay, which teachers do you like learning from? In which classes do you learn the most? It's the ones where they say, I have a good relationship with that teacher, where there's positive outcomes here, both academically and non-academically. And students who form negative relationships with teachers, there's just nothing productive there. They don't learn much. They don't feel good about themselves, the situation they're in those classrooms. They're not fun places to be in. And that doesn't mean that learning, it needs to be fun, like entertainment all the time. I think new teachers can get caught in that trap where they feel that they need to be entertaining students like a performer, like a clown, an entertainer. I'm here to amuse you and everything is fun. Learning isn't always fun. Learning is hard graft sometimes. It's not necessarily fun all the time, and certainly school and some of the content we have to deliver isn't always fun. But I think an environment can be enjoyable despite sometimes the content we're working with, and the enjoyment can come later when we get a good outcome from what we've done. So it's not necessarily that you need to be students' friends and to entertain them. That's not what we're saying here. I think that the message, what the research shows, and what I presented you here is that you're going in with this sense of, okay, how can we work together? How can I work with these unique individuals? And every class that you work with, there'll be a unique collection of young people, sometimes with very goals and motivations and backgrounds and who they are and who they wish to be. And you've got to work with that. And if you're not, if you don't approach that with an open sense of let's work together here, it's going to fall over. If it doesn't fall over initially, it will fall over eventually. And a lot of students just don't respond to, as I said, to that kind of authoritarian closed method anymore. So the other part of the slideshow I just wanted to talk to you about is, thinking about the different aspects of classroom management. Have a look there at this slide 9 there with the cogs. It kind of shows you this notion of, I guess it's a machine analogy of cogs working together in a machine, and how do I make this machine of my learning environment go? There are different parts of the machine I've got to make sure are working, and that is organizing the time and how the lesson's broken up, and also say a week of learning and how that cascades and folds into each other. There's the actual environment, the physical environment, and the content that you introduce to students, and there's the classroom management, the students, and making them pointing them in the right direction so that they can actually learn, and there are things that get produced there. So they talk about teachers as having this idea of lots of parallel things going on at the same time, and you can see why. That there's lots of spinning plates in the air as you're doing it all and making it go. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. At the end of a couple of days of teaching, you'll need naps. Trust me, you'll need lots of naps. But what the part of the slide, the next part, slides 10 and 11, talk about is this notion I've come up with myself in a way that is based on a lot of the research as well, from my own experiences teaching, and it dovetails into this notion of a kind of the machine of your classroom and making all the cogs turn. And a machine takes energy and it takes input. It takes a lot of input from you. You are the fuel a lot of the time to make that environment, that machine, go. You're putting in all of the stuff to make it go. And if at the end of the day there is an outcome that is positive, so you're putting in a lot of energy, you're putting a lot of energy into planning those learning experiences. You're already seeing that now as you're doing this assessment 1. That takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. It's the reason why I set the assessment actually quite late in the semester, because you've got to build up to it. You've got to bring in lots of different aspects and think about it in different ways, and engage with the learning theory side of things, with strategies, with different methods and designs and all of that. So you're putting a lot of energy into planning, putting a lot of energy into finding resources and pulling them together and making PowerPoints and putting together worksheets and materials and whatever else. You're putting a lot of energy on the day, in the moment, your energy, your passion, your enthusiasm for the subject, putting a lot of energy into monitoring students, getting them to behave, doing the right thing, making sure that they're all working towards the outcomes that you're set. Now, all of that pouring of your own energy, mental and physical and emotional, if the expected outcome is good, positive, yes, 2 thumbs up, there we go. If they learn, if they enjoy the lesson, if you can tell in the moment that, wow, like all of the stuff I've put into this experience right now in this 60 minutes is working and fantastic. It may not work for every single student, but on the whole, it's working well. It feels good, and you're teaching then. Think about the opposite though. What if all of that energy you put in and the expected outcome is apathy, is misbehavior, is, I don't care, I don't want to learn this, it doesn't matter to me. In fact, I'm going to make this learning experience that you've created pretty toxic and horrible and somewhat soul-destroying. That's exactly what it is. It is soul-destroying. It destroys, it eats away at your soul, your desire to be a teacher. And I've spoken to many pre-service teachers that have experienced this. They've gone into a lesson hoping that they're going to connect with students, that they're going to learn as a result of all this energy you put into planning something great for them, and nothing, not just nothing occurs, in fact, that things go backwards. So, this is really critical, because if you don't think about this sense of, okay, what kinds of energy am I putting into this lesson, and what outcomes am I going to get, you'll be exhausted very quickly. So you need to be carefully picking through for yourself, okay, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to work with these students? How am I going to perhaps go back to the drawing board and think about what's going to engage them? Maybe I need to take them out of the classroom and do something outside. Maybe I need to work very carefully thinking about particular students that may make this difficult for me in this class. What can I do with them? Maybe there's something I can engineer that I can get them on side. Maybe it's about the relationships that I need to build before I try these other things. So there's all sorts of things. Consult with your mentor, have a think, send me an email if you want advice, but you need to be thinking about this kind of idea of, okay, what if I'm going to be putting in this energy, what outcomes are going to result? Because this is this notion of management on slide 14 here, that, it's more than just about the classroom, what goes on in that single 60-minute lesson that you're designing. It's the stuff that happens before, obviously you're planning, it's the stuff that happens during, and it's the stuff after. It's your evaluation, it's the way that you communicate with perhaps particular students, and so it's this notion of within and without. So the things that are happening within, in the moment, right then, and then the stuff that happens outside, before and after, that frame it as well, and you've got to be thinking about all of that. So this gets me now to slide 15, and kind of the central pillar, as it were, of the philosophy that you need to approach, particularly around behaviour management. So classroom management, don't forget, is a broad umbrella term that refers to many aspects of what you do as a teacher, and think again about the cogs. So the within, without. It's classroom management is all of the stuff that you manage for that classroom. Behaviour management is a slice of that, a significant slice. But when we think about behaviour management, which is it takes a lot of your energy. Again, we think about where am I pouring my energy. A lot of the times, behaviour management, managing the behaviour of students, it takes an enormous amount of energy. So slide 15 is I guess the crux. What is the crux here of this philosophy, this approach? Minimization and prevention management. So the idea here is that it is absolutely futile to approach behavior management, which again sits under classroom management, thinking you're going to eliminate misbehavior. I'll tell you right now, you will never eliminate misbehavior. Instead, your approach needs to be thinking about, in fact, students, given the chance, will misbehave. All students. That is your approach. It sounds like a deficit model, but it's not. It's reality. And for those of you who have done previous unit of mine, you know that I approach all of my teacher education with this notion that it's both being an optimist and a realist, certainly being a pre-service teacher, if not a teacher whole. You have to have an optimism there, a core of optimism, but also really surrounded by a lot of realistic thinking about the modern teaching context and your job. But it's really, really important that you approach behavior management, I'll just reiterate it again, thinking that all students, if given the chance, in the right context, are going to misbehave. And misbehavior has all different kinds of levels, and that's approached later in the PowerPoint. But there's, small misbehaviors might be talking to their partner quietly, not about something other than the work. All the way to large misbehaviors of throwing things in the classroom or swearing at you, perhaps, and everything in between. So, all students in the right context will misbehave. So if you're going to approach a classroom of students, you're going to think, well, look, they're teenagers, right? Teenagers are social beings who take risks. That's what it is to be a teenager. In fact, the neurological stuff that they've done about the teenage brain shows that your frontal lobe part of your brain which is involved in planning a lot of the time, and also about risk taking and judging risks, and planning accordingly, is still developing right into your early 20s. So for teenagers, risk-taking behaviors, things where they're trying stuff out and taking risks and pushing boundaries, is part and parcel of their neurological makeup. And also, the frontal lobe has also been very much tied into personality, what you might think of personality, but who you are, or who you how you take yourself to be. That's all developing, and of course, teenagers, they're trying out different personalities. They're trying out being different kinds of people, and some of them try and be a naughty person. They do it because it's enjoyable, it's fun, they get a kick out of it, and maybe there's other stuff going on as well at home. And school, they have control over their situation, so they act up and they make your life difficult. Okay, so what? What are you going to do about it? That's the thing. I think dwelling on, these kids are making my life hell. Why are they doing this? Can't they just behave? All of that stuff. Those kinds of questions that you dwell on and churn over, that stuff will wear you down. It's exhausting. You have to go, okay, this has happened. This is what they're doing. So what? What do I do next? How can I approach this in a way where I can make this better? Where I can be the leader in the situation, deal with the problems that I have in front of me and analyze that, and work out a strategy or strategies to deal with it. And there are many different strategies. So, you really must be considering this notion of, okay, well, what is going on here? What are the students doing? How can I best respond to this situation? How can I minimize it? Because sometimes you can't eliminate it at all. And that's the approach. Remember, you can't eliminate this misbehavior. How do I minimize it? How do I bring it down so I can actually get down the learning that I need to? Maybe the students will talk to each other. I can't stop that entirely. So how do I direct that in the right ways? And how do I prevent certain behaviors, misbehaviors that are maybe dangerous or destructive? So that's the approach that you need to be taking. That forms that foundation. So again, just another way to think about it, just to talk about it quickly on slide 21, this idea of a classroom ecosystem, which I talked about a machine analogy before. This is an ecosystem analogy, which I in fact like a little bit better because it's more naturalistic. It's sort of, people aren't machines. They're natural. We live in, and then social environments are natural entities that sort of live and grow, which I like. So thinking about your classroom as an ecosystem and this living, breathing thing that has inhabitants, your students and you. It has a kind of environment, the things around you that form that ecosystem. It has inputs and outputs like ecosystems do. But how do we nurture a thriving, healthy ecosystem, classroom ecosystem? How do we do that? Well, we have to make it. We have to create it. We have to ensure that there are no pollutants, as it were, the toxic things that seed in our ecosystems. Pollution will make everyone sick, and the pollutants are, there could be many. If you've ever encountered yourself as a student, a kind of toxic place to learn, there's, all sorts of things that, bullying, violence, destruction of the property, a teacher who is, mean and punitive and doesn't like their students, and the students don't like them, and that's horrible. Nobody wants to live in a place like that, let alone learn. So thinking about your classroom like an ecosystem is a helpful way to go, okay, maybe there is a pollutant here. What is that pollutant? How do I get rid of it? How do I minimize it? How do I stop this being a significant part of what's going on in my living, breathing environment that I'm creating here? So, there are lots of features of your ecosystem, and slide 22 talks about that you need to be considering all the stuff that's going on. I know this is a lot. It is a lot of things to take in. But again, just pass through it and just work your way through it and think about, analyze what's going on. Again, observe, when you're in, again, those couple of first interactions and lessons that you're watching, slide 22, maybe just have your notebook and have some of these headings there and think about what's going on under each heading, about this kind of multi-dimensionality aspect, which is a great word, I love that word, about, what all this, there's so many things going on. How can I make notes about all the different things that are happening in this classroom at one time? Maybe there's some unpredictable stuff that arises, and does the teacher deal with it really well or poorly? The publicity aspect of classrooms, does a teacher call out a student's behavior publicly? Is that a good thing, or is it a bad thing? Should maybe the teacher have done that quietly? And, just look and observe and analyze what's happening. So I'm going to wrap up this particular video here and talk about strategies in the next video. And I hope, again, this has been useful for you. Again, if you have a look at slide 29, if you have slide 29 in front of you, this is what I'm just going to use to recap here and then talk about strategies again in a different context. But this notion of effective and less effective teachers, think about the ones that you've had in the past. What is it that they do? That effective teachers, it's largely invisible, the stuff that they do. It's because they're building from a really strong philosophy, a foundation, that they think, okay, students get misbehaved, so how do I respond to it? How do I do things that are contextually based, based on the problem that I see in front of me, that I can approach this objectively, I can respond with strategies and ways of interacting with these students that are helpful and will get us back on track, versus, and you build a respect. Students build respect for teachers that do that, whereas teachers that they don't respect are, highly emotive, visibly emotive, that particularly negative emotions. They lecture, they berate students, they belittle them, they treat them as if they were lesser human beings, where they are always in control and they are the authority rather than being a leader. And there's a difference there, that somebody who's a leader of a group of people doesn't need to be in authority all the time. They need to be in control sometimes of the environment, but that doesn't mean they need to be the ultimate authority. Sometimes students can be the authority of the learning and the pace and the scope and the direction of learning at times. So, these are the kind of things you need to be thinking about, taking predictive, proactive approach to classroom management. It's so important. And working from that central belief, rather than, and it's like lesson planning, that those teachers with a limited range of skills for behavior management tend to lose out eventually, whereas the greater the repertoire you can build, the more tools in your tool belt that you can deploy. Bang, I can do this in this situation and this in that situation. And I'm flexible and adaptable, and I can work with the context, work with the students, work with an individual in a way that's going to get us back on track, solving problems and learning here. Those teachers are the successful ones. And those teachers are the ones that are, it's up and down all the time, and it's not easy. And there are challenges, there are emotional challenges, mental, physical challenges. But on the whole, those teachers go, yes, the energy I'm putting in is working. The students are getting something out of it. I'm getting something out of it. This is fulfilling for both of us in this environment that we're in and the relationship that we have here. So I hope this has been useful and has helped you start to think about the direction that you're heading, importantly, to prepare for the placement. So thanks again for watching, everyone.